Hi everyone, we're just going to give it a few moments just to let everybody join us this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come join us this session. I'm just giving it a few more moments just to let everybody join, and then we'll kick off. Hope everyone's well wherever you are. Right, okay, let's get going. So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Lauren Wakefield. I'm the Marketing and Industry Programme Director for IAB Europe, and I'm very delighted to be hosting today's Industry Insider with LiveRamp. This is all part of our Trust and Transparency series, which we actually started last September because we wanted to bring people together to discuss trust and transparency and show what the industry was doing to address some of the challenges. So we're back here again this September running this series. And with that, we're also hosting a number of our Industry Insider webinars, including the one we have today. So for today's session, I'm very delighted to introduce Ian Fremaux, Solutions Architect and Head of International Pre-Sales at LiveRamp. He will talk us through Collaboration 101, the foundation of this practice through to the evolution of where we are now, the steps those within the advertising ecosystem should take to build relationships based on transparency and trust to allow for effective collaboration, and how brands are successfully executing these strategies right now. Today's session is live, so if you do have any questions for Ian as we go through his presentation, do feel free to add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll try to get to as many of them as we can at the end of his presentation today. But Ian, I will hand the microphone over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. I'm just going to share my screen, but thank you to the IAB as well for inviting us along to talk. Hang on, give me just a second. And hopefully you can now see my screen saying
You can see perfectly, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so just a little bit of background about myself. My background is as a IT professional, so I've been in technology for about 30 years, the first kind of 10 years as a developer, and then since then more as a kind of solutions architect and marketing technology consultant type roles in marketing and ad tech over that period. So I did a long stint at Axiom, and then about almost 5 years ago now transitioned across to the LiveRamp team, where I helped launch the data collaboration platform that we built in Europe, actually, initially for Carrefour back in 2018, which went live back then. And my role initially was a product manager, but now I've moved more into that kind of pre-sales role, as Lauren mentioned. And today I'm going to talk, thank you for the intro. So I'm going to talk about data collaboration and what that means to brands in that kind of ad tech and media advertising industry, and how brands confront some of the challenges around trust, I guess. So using data collaboration to build more trust in what they're doing in terms of media, but also making brands feel confident in using data collaboration. One of the things we have found is when brands are new to doing this, there is a lot of concern and they find it quite scary about saying, okay, I'm going to let somebody else access my data and use it for one of their own use cases. So there's a number of elements that trust comes into play. So data collaboration, helping solve some of those trust issues in media, but also making sure that when brands are doing this, they trust each other and they have a platform that allows them to do it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how today technology helps deliver that kind of trust for people to feel confident in doing data collaboration. So there's the agenda, which I'll go through, starting off with a little bit of background about what we mean by data collaboration, the types of data collaboration that brands are engaging in today within the media and ad tech space. and then go through a quick case study and how to get started, and then finally talk about the key capabilities that we think are really important for a data collaboration platform. Okay, so first of all, when we're talking about data collaboration, what we mean by this is two brands or two companies coming together to try and find projects where they can deliver win-win outcomes. So things that are mutually beneficial to both companies' objectives. And also, I think in some ways there should almost be a third circle on this for the customer as well. So something that they can do together to normally deliver a better customer experience. So that kind of where an example where everyone can gain some benefit. And a couple of the terms we use here. So data rich and data poor. This is in the context of a particular data collaboration objective. So data poor does not necessarily mean the company doesn't have vast amounts of data, but it may be that there's a gap. So something they don't know about their consumers, that by collaborating with someone else, they can fill in those gaps and execute things that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise without doing that collaboration. So in terms of what those collaboration use cases are, the main ones that we see our clients working together on is audience building. So how do you find your customers through data? So classic example being kind of retail CPG, where a CPG will work with a retailer to find out who actually buys their products. Controlled activation is then, okay, having built my audience and done my planning, how do I actually reach them? And this is where within collaboration, the data owners need to have a level of control to say, okay, I'm happy with my data to be activated on that particular platform, but it needs to be maybe on my seat from a media perspective as well. Measurement's fairly self-evident. It's like, did it work? If I am running a campaign, if I'm using data to join everything together, I can measure it and I can solve some of those trust problems that people have had in the past with using more kind of cookie-based audiences, etc., and where it's not being driven from actual people level shopper behavior data, for example. And then finally, advanced insights. This is a bit of a catch-all, to be honest. It can be using data to enhance your view of the customer. It could be quite sophisticated, sort of modeling out of what my customers are doing in terms of what other products they're buying when they buy mine. It might be understanding if the purchase of your brand is dropping in a particular region of the country, and if so, is it because the whole category is dropping, or just or someone else is out competing you? So those kind of insights are fairly broad that can be delivered through data collaboration. So I'm talking a little bit about the evolution. So one of the things that, despite people's nervousness, it has been going on for decades. So data collaboration has been going on from before the year 2000, but I put that in there because it's kind of my first experience was actually around about that time working on building solutions for in telco, actually, for Vodafone to build a first-party first-party data asset by working with all the people they sold mobile phone contracts through at the time, Carphone Warehouse and a few dozen others. So bringing all their data together so they could have build a first-party data asset and talk directly to their customers. And there were a lot of these kind of solutions at the time, financial services, especially with prospect pools, combining credit reference agency data with affiliate data. The problems with these solutions is they were expensive. So they were expensive to build and operate. They were also expensive in terms of the channels that they were acquiring customers through. So they tended to be the more offline type channels like direct mail or telemarketing. So what we saw was at the end of the kind of noughties is as kind of financial services didn't really want to acquire any more customers at the point of the credit crunch, but then when they came back a couple of years later, there was a real appetite to move into a cheaper platform for doing this type of acquisition marketing. And that shift into digital started happening around 2012 as DMPs started appearing with their own marketplaces and the ability to upload your own data to target people in a more addressable manner. And that really took off for a good few years. We had Facebook launching things like partner categories. And that was really where the growth area was for data collaboration for a long time. until 2018. So GDPR came in and a lot of those players dropped out the market because of consent issues about how they were actually capturing consent for their data. And also some of those data marketplaces started to close down in Europe, especially. Facebook decided to shut down partner categories after the Cambridge Analytica issues. So there was a bit of a definite decline in that kind of marketplace, digital buying and collaboration at that point. At the same time, clean rooms started appearing, and that's really been the trend ever since. So LiveRamp launched our own data collaboration platform. You also had Google launching Ads Data Hub in around 2018, and the first of these type of clean rooms that people became familiar with. And since then, those have been technologies where all the growth has been. So today, this is where the growth is. There may still be some of the previous kind of prospect pools around, but that's clearly been in decline for a long time. And the same with the marketplaces more recently. So why is data collaboration important? One of the key things about that it allows you to do is, as things change and as new trends come about, it allows you to respond more quickly. So businesses that collaborate with data are able to react to those kind of new trends, which gives them a level of competitive advantage over and above what they could do on their own. And the data-rich organizations, so the people who are providing data to others, typically, if we think about retailers and CPGs, it helps them build that stronger relationship with their partners and providing a more meaningful insights on the performance of products as well. And if it's driving additional sales, both parties are going to benefit. So the retailer and the CPG get that kind of performance boost. And it also allows them to develop new revenue streams. So we've seen retail media networks launched over the last couple of years in the UK market as well, which are completely new revenue streams for those retailers with their data assets. On the other side, the people who they're working with, the data poor in this instance, are actually getting a lot of benefit in terms of understanding their customers better. And the more they understand the customers, the more they can be personalized and improve that customer experience, and also understand how their products are working against competitors. So the advantages are fairly clear about why it's important. And if we just think about where it happens and who's doing it, so the retail CPG is a really good example of intermediated customer relationships. So as a product manufacturer, if I don't sell direct, or only a small percentage of my product is sold direct, I probably don't know as much as I would like to about my customer. I don't know, what else they're buying at the same time, how often they purchase, etc. So if I want to fill that gap, I need to work with that retailer who sits in the middle of that purchase relationship. And it's not just relevant to retail CPG, that's true across lots of different industries as well, that intermediated approach. One of the other areas that's impacted by that is also, if you think about publishers. If I'm a publisher and I'm running campaigns on behalf of an advertiser, how do I ensure the advertiser can measure whether the campaign is successful on my platform? How does the advertiser get that level of trust and transparency that they want when they're running a campaign on my platform? Once again, it needs that collaboration piece to happen, and have retailers come in and work with publishers to provide those services back to the advertiser. Okay, another example of this, as well as that intermediate relationship, would be complementary services. So travel industry is an obvious one, where airlines understand where you're traveling to way in advance when you book your ticket. That kind of information is really useful for local transportation, leisure attractions, etc. So it's a really good opportunity in certain industries and certain players in certain industries to collaborate with people who they don't directly necessarily compete with, but they are complementary services or businesses. We also see still quite a few data specialists. So people who may have a very predictive in-market signal. So intent to purchase in auto, for example. We do work with companies where that kind of information can be really useful from a collaboration perspective when they're working with the OEMs of the auto industry. Similar with survey panel data, which is also providing some of those signals as well. So we see lots of different types of collaboration, but those kind of very common examples that I've gone through there. The nice thing about the retail CPG one is what we have seen with the retailers we've worked with over the last few years is most of their CPGs are interested in understanding what's working and what's not. So they're not just doing activation, they're also interested in doing that measurement piece. So if I build a campaign using your data, I'm doing data-driven buying of the media, I can actually close the loop and understand, did it actually work? Which means you can come out with these, you can do the measurement type stats that I've got here on the screen. And I'm not going to talk through these, but I will talk about one particular example. So Danone, who I'm sure you all know as a kind of food and beverage brand, they really wanted to strengthen their consumer intelligence, so what they knew about their customers, and also improve their media strategy and ROI. So they felt they could do things better by having a more data-driven approach, a more person-based approach to buying media. And this was back in 2020. So they also had the additional challenges of the pandemic. So shopper behaviors were changing quite quickly with a shift to more online and potential for them to have a direct relationships. But you also had changes in media consumption. So they really felt that it was a time where they had to take the plunge and find partners to work with to start being more addressable in how they ran campaigns. So their first campaign ended, they actually went from having like 0% of their audience buying based on actual targeting actual purchasers, so addressable buyers, to actually now being able to reach 34%, so over a third of the people buying their products, they could now address through different media channels, which was a really big success for them. They could measure impact on sales lift, etc., shown here. So their goals were both, were both achieved in terms of understanding more about the consumer, that consumer insights, but also having an impact on the business as well. And we got this quote from Manuel, who was the director of media, which I really liked, especially that first piece. So if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. So I really like the fact that it kind of says, look, it's not going to be easy. There's more things to do to collaborate. But if you do take the effort of finding the right people to collaborate with and get your internal teams on side for doing this, it's going to give you bigger advantages longer term. It's going to be enable you to do things that you're not going to be able to do on your own. So I think it's a great quote from Manuel there. So moving on now, what I'm going to talk about is some of the steps that you can go through to start building those kind of trust-based relationships with other partners who you want to collaborate with. So the 4 steps, so starting with taking baby steps, focus on business outcomes, finding the right partners, and keep putting your customer first. So dropping into a little more detail. So starting with the baby steps is really particularly true of data-rich companies who are looking to create new revenue streams for their data, for example. It's probably something where you do need to take a more considered approach and start with a particular strategy that rather than trying to get to the final destination all in one go. If we think about an example, so we work with Boots in the UK at LiveRamp for the last couple of years. And what they wanted to do is start using, the first step in their on their journey, was to actually start using their own data about purchase from reward card members within their own advertising. So using audience they built, using shopper behavior to target on different addressable media. And they went from originally, I think when we started working with them, about 6% of their media buying was using an addressable audience or a first party audience. And over the course of the year, they went up to over 40% of that media. And they went from using 3 channels to over a dozen during that period as well. So it was a big shift in terms of using that data. But it also, because they were measuring it, they knew it worked. So when just over a year ago, or almost a year ago, they launched Boots Media Group, they'd already proven by doing those initial steps to say, okay, let's make sure it works before we launch Boots Media Group, which has subsequently launched and has been providing value, the value they expect those CPG partners who they're working with. The next point, focus on the business outcome, seems fairly obvious. And I think the important point here is, making sure that whatever your hypothesis is for what you're going to be able to achieve is actually do all the research you can to try and prove it. We did some analysis a few years ago on usage of data within the marketplaces, the data marketplaces like Facebook partner categories. And it really did follow the 80-20 rule. 20% of the data in the marketplaces was driving 80% of the revenue. And it may have been even more skewed than that. But it's difficult to know that without sort of doing the kind of analysis and speaking to people and understanding what they were interested in first. So I think that's a really important step as well. Finding the right partners. So this isn't about if I'm who I want to partner with on a collaboration. What I mean by this is making sure that you've got the right technology. So you're working with the right technology partners to help you. And I'll talk more about that on the following slides, about what kind of technologies are going to be really important there. But it's also about the operational model. So when we see retailers launching retail media networks, for example, they're not necessarily jumping straight in, allowing brands to have self-service access to their data. They're tending to do it by taking a number of steps at a time. And it might be that if you're going to run certain services, maybe measurement on behalf of publishers, you need to make sure you've got the right team engaged to help do those kind of services. It may not be a skill set that you have internally. So you do need to go out there, find the right partners, get advice from people who've been working in those spaces about how to structure those teams internally as well. And finally, putting the customer first. And we hear this a lot from people we work with, as long as what we're doing, we're thinking about how it's improving the customer experience, everything else should just follow. And it removes a lot of those barriers in terms of making sure that doing data collaboration is going to bring the rest of the business along with you. Okay, so now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the capabilities of a data collaboration platform. And at LiveRamp, we kind of have this term enhanced clean rooms, because we think although a clean room is an important part of data collaboration, you can do data collaboration without clean rooms, and extending the clean room with additional applications is going to enable you to potentially do more things and have different options available to people you want to work with. However, clean rooms and data collaboration platforms, they still need to be based on the same 4 pillars of capability. And I'm going to go through each of them now. So it's security, privacy, consolidate, so being able to consolidate data sets together on a consistent ID, and finally control. So having control about who does what with your data, and making sure that that's driving the right trust about when your data is being used. Okay, so I'm going to talk pretty quickly about security. So this is the stuff that your information security teams really care about, and your CDO. Most platforms in data collaboration, they're going to be very strong in this area. It's certainly worth doing your homework and going through that process that your InfoSec teams would, to make sure that all of these types of capabilities are in place for any platform that you're going to put your data into. But to be honest, this is almost like table stakes for anyone who's building clean rooms, etc. The security aspect has to be there, but definitely, it's something that you'll need to go through that process to ensure the kind of protection that you have for your data meets your internal needs of your business. But moving on to privacy. So privacy is a little bit different. So privacy is very much focused on ensuring that if I put my data into a data collaboration platform and make it available to somebody else, that they cannot re-identify my customers. I don't want them to be able to do anything that enables them to see who my customers actually are. And there's a few different approaches for doing this. And I'm going to start on the left. And at LiveRamp, we use all three of these techniques because there isn't one that's right for everybody. Some of our clients use all three and others are just in one or two of these boxes. But starting on the left, limiting access to your data to only be accessible through an application. So creating specific applications that can be used to deliver those use cases that we talked about earlier. So having an audience builder, having a set of reports that give you that insight about shopper behavior, for example, having pre-packaged reports on things like sales lift measurement. So if your data collaboration platform provides those different applications, it has kind of two big benefits. One, obviously there's no way of doing that re-identification because it can be restricted through the applications. So it ticks the box on the privacy side. Also, it means it can be used by campaign planners and business users. So if you want to scale up your business and work with lots of different organizations, you're not asking them to have a particular technical capability because it should be something that all the business users can be used. So pretty much everyone we work with has or makes use of the application, some of the applications we provide. I think option 2 is slightly different. So option 2 is where you are going to allow access to your data, but clearly no personal data. So everything is connected on a pseudonymous ID that can never be reversed back to an email address, for example. But also, it's going to be restricted about what data you can put in, and you won't be able to take any data out. So it's going to have some protection to stop people trying to re-identify customers through those mechanisms. Where these are popular is where we've got organizations that we work with who have their own data science teams who build their own methodologies. So where some of the frustrations from a few years ago about measurement in digital campaigns and sort of programmatic campaigns, businesses have created a lot of their own measurements to understand, what is working. Can I really trust this audience I'm buying? Now, within data collaboration, because you can build an audience using data of people who are purchasing your product and then target them and then close the loop and bring that data together, it does give you the opportunity to do that kind of measurement. And some of the more advanced CPGs, particularly that we work with, they have their own code, they have their own models, they have their own methodology. And using this second option, they can download that code into the platform, they can run it themselves, and then they can really trust what they're seeing as results because it's their methodology. It's not something that's been enforced on them by an application that has been built either within a data collaboration platform or indeed within one of the walled gardens, for example. It's their methodology. On the right-hand side are privacy enhancing technologies, or PETs, which is a slightly different approach. And it still has the same objective of ensuring against consumer re-identification, but using statistically based proven algorithms to ensure that when queries are run against the data, that you can't re-identify. And there are a number of different types of these PETs, and they work slightly different, but the objective is the same. I think the big difference here is you would, if you already have a methodology for doing measurement, for example, if you actually are using an environment with PETs as the interface, you're going to have some more work to do to maybe refactor how that works, that methodology. So there's a bit more of a learning curve. And I think sort of conclude here, if you start on the left-hand side and move across to the right, the level of complexity for using the platforms generally is increasing a little bit. So in the middle section, your existing code is probably going to work fine, but as you move to the right, there's a little bit more work to do to ensure you can still deliver those same benefits back to the business. But there's no one thing that's right. It's all about having options, and it depends on the skill sets within businesses, etc., and which ones there's going to be most suitable for an individual company. So Consolidate, this refers to bringing data sets together. So if you're doing data collaboration, obviously in a lot of instances, you're going to have one company's first party data, so about their customers, that you want to connect to another business's data. So potentially, shopper behavior information that you want to connect together and be able to close the loop on campaigns, for example. Or it could be that you've got your own first-party data that you want to connect to a publisher, and you want to match your data against the publisher's audiences of visitors, so you can target them for a campaign or do that post-campaign measurement type work again. So that consolidating requires some kind of way of connecting data together, which is normally done based on some kind of consistent ID. And if I look on the left-hand side here, so internally within many businesses, they will have put a lot of effort into building their own single customer views, and they'll potentially have their own ID that connects information that they know about people over time. So in this example, we've got different email addresses and addresses this person's lived at, but they have a consistent ID. However, it is the ID that's specific to that company, and you can't use that to connect it to anything else. So there's a few different options for how you would do it. One is you could just give all your personal data to another business, which 20 years ago may have been an option. I think now very, very few companies are willing to share their personal data with more than maybe one or two partners. So that's generally not an option for data collaboration anymore. Another option would be create a unified ID. So if you've got two parties, let's say the most common example being a hashed email address, or a HEM. So both parties will take their email addresses, they'll use a particular algorithm that converts that email address into this hashed email address identifier, that's universal ID, that you can then use to connect two data sets together. So you can see what purchases your customers made, for example, if you're working with a retailer in collaboration. There are a few things to be aware of that are not ideal for using that approach. One is potentially you're going to get lower match rates. So if you do have other data like names and address and phone numbers, etc., if you're just matching on those hashed email addresses, you're going to miss out on potentially some other connections. So we do find that we work with clients who then transition to other ways. They actually see an improvement in the ability to match when they move away from HEMS. One of the other ones is it may limit you in where you can activate. So if you build an audience in a clean room where you've connected data on HEMS, your options for then activating are activating using that HEM, which limits you to what channels you can use. And I think you may be okay for some walled gardens, but other places like connected TV, etc., that's not going to work. What you may be able to do is, if the clean room is provided by the publisher, is activate back onto their site. But it generally, going down the HEMS route, limits your breadth of activations you can do. So if you gain those insights, you really want to make them available as many places as possible. There's also some kind of security issues, or with HEMS, they're not necessarily the most secure way of doing things. It doesn't stop people from doing universal tracking if they have access to the bid stream, for example. So there's another reason why HEMS may not be the perfect way of doing it. A third, the option that we use at LiveRamp is to use all of that customer data to create a truly pseudonymous ID based on knowledge as well. So creating an ID that you can then take through, or we take through a series of pseudonymization steps. So multiple hashing and encryption steps. That means every partner has a unique pseudonymous ID. We refer to it as the RAMP ID, but everyone has a different ID. And it's only when you put them in the clean room or into the safe haven environment that they're translated to a common version. So as you bring two data sets together, they're then connected on a common version of the RAMP ID. And that RAMP ID can then be used for activation as well across all the rest of the ecosystem where LiveRamp's synchronized that RAMP ID as well. So another question we get asked about quite often around this identity piece is, if I've got a CDP and I've just deployed a CDP and I'm using it to do ID stitching, etc., can I use my CDP then to do this collaboration piece? The problem is with the CDPs, you're generally creating this offline ID. So it's the same offline ID that we had on the previous diagram. And you've still got that challenge of, if I want to connect to a partner's data, how do I get it to a consistent ID? So while the CDPs are great and they're really good for pushing data into your known customer channels, there are some challenges around collaboration and also activating on channels that don't support that they can't support because they've only got the option of pushing your personal information or maybe a hashed email address into an activation channel outside of the kind of typical web personalization, email, in-app messaging type things that CDPs do a really good job on. So we're working with quite a lot of CDPs now who are then having interfaces into LiveRamp where they can push a segment created in the CDP directly into LiveRamp Safe Haven platform for collaboration. And at that point, it's converted to the LiveRamp pseudonymous ID, which allows you then to connect all the other parties. So the identity thing is a really important area to think about, and also how it is used in conjunction with your privacy enhancing technology. So going back to that HEMS, for example, if I was using HEM as a connection for connecting data sets, I would also want to be over here on the right-hand side using the right privacy enhancing technology to make sure no one could ever see the HEM as well, to hide that away. So that kind of identity management and privacy, they are linked, but they're both very important independent capabilities. So the final one is control. So if I'm going to permission data to a partner, how do I make sure when they use my data, they're using it in the way that I'm happy with? Within our LiveRamp platform, so in this example, so this is a screenshot actually of our permission management module. So if I was permissioning an audience I'd created, so if I was a retailer, I'd create an audience of people who purchase particular products. If I want to make that available to a CPG brand, I'm going to go through this kind of wizard approach to define exactly what they're allowed to do with my data. So initially, I'm going to say, okay, who's it going to be I'm going to permission my data to? This is from my demo system. So I'm going to permission data to my demo brand, but how long for? Do they need it forever or only for the period of the campaign? And then these are the really important bits. What am I going to allow them to do with my data? Do I want them to use it for audience building or not, or just to get insights? You know, and if I want to use it, allow them to use it for audience building, do I care if they use it for lookalike modeling? So if I'm a panel provider, a Yugo or a Kantar, I'm fine about them being used for lookalike modeling. But if I'm a retailer, I probably don't want my data to be used for lookalike modeling because it's actually then going to build an audience of people who look like my customers. They're probably my competitors' customers. So these kind of options need to be available when you're doing data collaboration. So you've got that trust and control about how your data is being used. Similarly, distribution. If in that kind of retail media network scenario, a lot of what the retailers are after as well is to make sure that the activation of audiences is on their media network. So their seats on different platforms, whether that's on a DSP or a walled garden, they may actually want to control the media buying. So being able to say, well, actually, I'll let you access my data to build an audience, but when you actually want to activate that audience, it needs to be activated on my seat because I'm going to control the media buying as well, which gives them lots of options from a commercial proposition for how they're actually providing those services back to their partners. And then if you've also got a set of applications to control the use cases, it's really easy to have these permissions tightly linked into the application and the user experience as well. And by doing that, it's then easier to allow brands to self-service their own audience building on the platform, because you know, and you've got that, you understand that if you permission data to be used for certain things, the recipient of the data, when it's permissioned across, is going to be restricted through what they can do through an application tier as well. So it kind of gives you that real trust and control about how your data is being used. The same's true for permissioning data between data scientists. So this is an example of where we're permissioning data and setting some of those differential privacy type settings for the recipient to restrict what they can do with the data. So this kind of tier of or set of applications for control is vitally important. It also needs to allow it to be transparent. So what's been set up, who's allowed to do what with the data I've shared with them or permission to them. And in fact, what did they do with it? So being able to pull reports down to go, okay, I permissioned this segment to this particular partner of mine. I've said they can build it a lookalike and activate on Google, for example. Did they actually do that? And if so, how many times did they activate on Google? So control is about transparency, as well as understanding, or as well as restricting how your data can be used based on, you know, what you put in, what agreements you have, and what your objectives are as a business. So the final slide I've got to go through, I'm not actually going to talk through this, but this is just some recommendations we made based on some work we did with some CIOs a while ago, in terms of the kind of questions they should be asking and themselves, and thinking about using when they actually think about data collaboration, and what kind of platforms and technologies and how they're going to go about collaborating with their partners. So as I said, I'm not going to go through that, but that's my final slide. So Lauren, that's the end of the slides I was going to go to. I don't know whether we've got any questions that have come through.
Oh, thank you so much for going through that, Ian. I actually had a couple of questions for you as you're going through. So what do you kind of think is going to be the key trend in the next few years based on?
So I think, and we're starting to see this a little bit already, is a kind of, rather than just two parties collaborating, is more of a many-to-many collaboration. Yeah. So people who are looking at doing like cross-screen measurement, for example, and they want to work across a whole raft of different partners. So that many-to-many collaboration is definitely something that we're getting ready for, rather than this kind of peer-to-peer collaborations that we see a lot of today. Yeah,
perfect. And when I mean, I guess, where do you think trends will come from? I guess from the technology side of things.
So I think technology is certainly evolving quite quickly, particularly those kind of privacy enhancing technologies, and almost tied to the many-to-many in some respects. What we're also seeing, and what a lot of what we're doing in sort of investment research and new products in, is around federation as well.
Yeah.
So how do I allow someone, or how do I collaborate with someone else, but neither of us want to move our data at all? So we don't want to put any data into a kind of clean room scenario. We want the technology to allow us to define the rules about how my data can be accessed. But this concept of the code being sent to the data rather than the data going to the code. So that kind of federated approach is something that we're seeing, and it's kind of also tied into, as I said, that kind of many-to-many type approach as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for taking us through that. And if anyone does have any other questions for Ian that you maybe think about beyond the webinar today, do feel free to email us at communication@ibeurope.eu, and we'd be more than happy to send those across to Ian to answer for you. But thank you, Ian, so much for taking us through that. And thank you everyone that has joined us live today. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks then.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.